In the early morning hours of May 8, 2014, the small city of Grimes, Iowa, was shaken by a crime so chilling that it left investigators and family members grasping for answers. What began as a quiet night in the home of Justin Michael, a 30-year-old Wells Fargo analyst, would soon unravel into a nightmare. Inside the house that evening were three people: Justin, his fiancée Angie Verlee, and his mother Marie Michael, who was visiting for a few days. Justin and Angie had been busy preparing for their upcoming wedding, which was just weeks away, and Marie had come to help with some of the planning. The night was uneventful. A family dinner, conversation about wedding details, and then everyone heading to bed a little after 11 p.m. But at approximately 3:20 a.m., Marie was startled awake. She recalled hearing a creak at her bedroom door. Still groggy, she opened her eyes just in time to notice two unsettling things: a faint red beam of light cutting through the darkness and a shadowy figure in the doorway. Within seconds, both were gone, vanishing into the night as quickly as they had appeared. Confused and uncertain if she had imagined it, Marie lay frozen. But any doubts disappeared when, only moments later, the silence was shattered by 4 sharp pops coming from Justin's bedroom. At that same moment, Angie was jolted awake. She too saw the red light and the dark figure fleeing the room. For a brief second, she thought Justin had gotten up, until she turned and saw him lying next to her, unmoving. She shook him desperately, but he didn't respond. Instead, she was met with a horrifying sound, a faint, choking gurgle. Turning on the light revealed a nightmare she could never have prepared for. Justin had been shot multiple times at close range, the wounds clustered around his head and neck. Though paramedics rushed to the scene, there was nothing they could do. Justin had died almost instantly, his body never moving from the peaceful sleeping position he'd been in moments before the attack. When investigators arrived, they quickly pieced together some unsettling details. 4 9mm shell casings were found on the bed, along with bullet holes in the wall behind it. Powder burns indicated that the shots had been fired from extremely close range, leaving no question. The killer's intent was deliberate and personal. But there was something strange. The crime scene had been staged to look like a burglary. A DVD player in the living room had been unplugged but not taken. A sweatshirt that didn't belong to anyone in the home was left on the floor, and the back door showed signs of forced entry. Despite this, nothing valuable was missing. Detectives immediately dismissed the idea of a random intruder. This wasn't a robbery. This was an execution, and whoever carried it out had passed over both Angie and Marie, leaving them alive. That choice told investigators everything they needed to know. Justin Michael was the target. But why? Justin was widely described as kind, outgoing, and someone without enemies. He had a stable job, close family ties, and was weeks away from marrying the woman he loved. If anyone seemed unlikely to be the victim of such a cold-blooded crime, it was him. For detectives, 2 urgent questions now loomed. Who wanted Justin Michael dead? What could possibly be the motive? The answers would take investigators on a winding path filled with strange clues, red herrings, and ultimately, a shocking truth no one could have predicted. Before diving deeper into the investigation, it's important to understand who Justin Michael was. To those who knew him best, Justin wasn't just a victim of a senseless act of violence. He was a man who seemed to have everything ahead of him. From an early age, Justin's family noticed his adventurous spirit. He loved the outdoors, enjoyed camping, playing sports, and exploring history. His parents encouraged that curiosity, and when Justin was in college at Iowa State University, he had an experience that left a permanent mark on him. On a mission trip to Egypt with his father, Justin witnessed firsthand the power of community service. His brother would later say that this trip sparked something in Justin, a deep desire to live with purpose and to help others. Whenever he could, after graduating with a degree in public service and administration in agriculture, Justin landed a stable job at Wells Fargo as an operations analyst. For many, that would be enough, but Justin's life was never defined by work alone. He built a wide circle of friends, volunteered with Habitat for Humanity, and stayed active in local sports leagues. He was the kind of person who filled his days with experiences, always striving to make the most of life. Yet, for all the fulfillment his career and hobbies provided, Justin still longed for a partner to share it all with. That missing piece fell into place in June 2013 when he met Angie Verlee, a school teacher from the area. From the beginning, Angie felt Justin was different. He was warm, charismatic, and full of energy, qualities that stood out immediately. Their connection was instant, and before long, their relationship grew serious. Within just a few months, Justin proposed, and Angie said yes. The couple set their wedding date for July 2014, planning a ceremony in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, a place filled with childhood memories for Justin. For Angie, it was more than just a wedding. It was the start of a life she had always dreamed of. For Justin, it was the next great adventure. As the months ticked down, their days became filled with wedding preparations. At the same time, Justin continued to make plans for the future. He wanted to start a garden at their home in Grimes, take a summer camping trip with his brother, and keep traveling the way he always had. Just days before tragedy struck, Justin and Angie even went skydiving together. Angie was nervous, but Justin was beaming with excitement, living the moment to the fullest, just as he always did. That day, the couple posed for a picture in their jumpsuits, smiling widely. At the time, it seemed like just another memory in the story of their lives together. But in hindsight, that skydiving trip would be their last shared adventure. Less than a week later, Justin's life was stolen from him in the most brutal way imaginable. The tragedy was not only heartbreaking for Angie, who lost her future husband, but for his family and friends who knew how much he had yet to experience. They were left to wonder how such a vibrant and kind man could be the target of such a violent act. For investigators, understanding Justin's character only deepened the mystery. Here was a man with no known enemies, no shady dealings, and no history of conflict. If someone had gone to such lengths to end his life, the reason had to lie somewhere beyond the surface, and as detectives would soon learn, the motive wasn't tied to Justin's job, his finances, or his lifestyle. Instead, the key to solving the case would come from looking at the people closest to Angie and the hidden tensions from her past. For investigators, the first hours after a murder are crucial. Once Justin's body was taken from the home and the crime scene secured, attention turned to the two people who had witnessed the terrifying events, Angie Verlee and Marie Michael. Both women were brought in for questioning almost immediately. Detectives separated them into different rooms, wanting to compare their accounts for consistency. At first, officers found their demeanor unusual. Neither cried openly, and Angie seemed oddly preoccupied, even asking about notifying her employer she'd be absent from work. But as investigators knew, grief doesn't always present in the same way. They soon concluded both women were simply in shock. When questioned, Marie described being awoken by the sound of her bedroom door, the flash of a red light, and the glimpse of a dark figure. Angie told a similar story, adding that she'd seen the same figure after hearing 4 gunshots in quick succession. She had turned to find Justin bleeding beside her, his body unresponsive. Detectives quickly formed a theory about the red light. It wasn't random. It was almost certainly the beam of a laser sight attached to the killer's weapon. That small detail made the crime even more unsettling. It suggested the shooter came prepared and fully intended to hit their target with precision. The biggest question still remained. Why Justin? Investigators pressed Angie and Marie for any clues. Could Justin have been in financial trouble? Did he owe money, gamble, or use drugs? Had there been infidelity or conflict in his relationship? The answer was the same from both women. No. Justin lived a clean, stable life. Everyone seemed to love him. But then Angie remembered something strange. Several months earlier, in November 2013, her car had been vandalized outside her home. The windows were smashed, the paint was scratched, and parts of the car appeared beaten with a blunt object. Oddly, it was the only vehicle on the street targeted that night. At the time, she brushed it off as a random act, but detectives now wondered if the incident was linked. That led them to probe further into Angie's past relationships. She admitted that before Justin, she had dated a man named Andy Wagner for about 3 years. Their breakup in early 2013 had been civil, she said, and Andy had since moved on with someone else. Still, his name went into the detective's notes. Then, Angie mentioned another brief connection. A man she had casually texted after her split from Andy. His name was David Moffat. Angie said she barely remembered him. Their relationship was short-lived, more like a fling than anything serious. David was younger, seemed immature, and their conversations fizzled quickly. Angie thought little of it at the time, especially since she met Justin soon afterward and stopped hearing from David altogether. For investigators, though, both names, Andy and David, stood out. These were the only potential threads linking Angie to someone who might have motive. Could jealousy or resentment have played a role? Detectives decided to dig deeper. They ran weapons permit checks on both men, but nothing came up. What they did find, however, was far more intriguing. On the morning of Justin's murder, just 30 minutes after the shooting, one of these men had been in a car accident just a few miles from the crime scene. The man was David Moffat. The responding deputy described finding Moffat's car crashed into a ditch along a rural gravel road near Highway 141. When the officer arrived, Moffat wasn't in the vehicle. He came running from a nearby field, sweaty and covered in grass and burrs, as if he had been hiding. He provided ID and paperwork, but there was a problem. Moffat had no insurance, so the car was impounded. A taxi was called to pick him up, and the deputy left to assist at the murder scene in Grimes, unaware of the potential connection. For detectives, this was no coincidence. Why would David Moffat, who lived nearly 30 miles away in Pleasant Hill, be in a remote rural area at 4 a.m., so close to the murder scene? The pieces were beginning to form a picture, but what police found at the crash site would transform their suspicion into a chilling certainty that they were on the right. Track detectives wasted no time combing through the area where David Moffat's car had crashed. The site was remote, surrounded by gravel roads and overgrown fields, but scattered across the grass were items that told a story, one far darker than a simple car accident. The first discovery was a pair of blue rubber gloves, torn and tossed about. Investigators immediately suspected these had been worn to avoid leaving fingerprints. Next, they found a Kindle e-reader, and when they powered it on, one of the most recent search terms jumped out: Grimes. It was an eerie coincidence. Given that Justin Michael's home was in Grimes, Iowa, then came something even more damning: 2 fully loaded 9mm magazines. Detectives knew Justin had been killed with a 9mm weapon. The location of the accident, the suspicious items, and the ammunition all but tied the scene directly to the murder. But perhaps the most baffling clue was what they found next: a shoebox containing a receipt for an oil change. The name on the receipt wasn't David Moffat's, it was Andy Wagner's. This discovery threw investigators into confusion. Was Andy involved after all? Had David and Andy been working together? Or was someone trying to set Andy up? Detectives brought Andy Wagner in for questioning. Calm and cooperative, Andy explained that he and Angie had broken up amicably and that he was now in a new relationship. His girlfriend could verify his whereabouts, and he even produced receipts from the night of the murder, placing him miles away. He also gave police full access to his car and home. When asked about the oil change receipt, Andy said he usually tossed receipts into the backseat of his car and only cleaned them out every few months. If one had gone missing, he hadn't noticed. To detectives, his openness was convincing. Andy didn't appear to be hiding anything. Meanwhile, a search of David Moffat's house yielded more disturbing finds. Investigators uncovered packaging for hearing protection, camouflage face paint, and, most alarmingly, documents that again pointed to Andy. Among them was a bill of sale for a firearm with Andy Wagner's name on it, dated just 4 days before Justin's murder. The gun listed was a high-point 9mm carbine rifle, consistent with the type of weapon used in the crime. It appeared on paper that Andy had purchased it. But something didn't add up. Detectives tracked down the man who sold the gun, a private seller named Drew Ballman. He explained that he had listed the firearm online and eventually met a buyer at a gas station to complete the sale. He required identification and a signature, which matched Andy Wagner's information. But when asked if he could identify the man he sold to, Drew hesitated. The buyer had worn a hat and dark sunglasses, concealing much of his face. He wasn't sure if it was Andy or not. Still, Drew had kept the original bullets and casings fired from the rifle before he sold it. Ballistics testing confirmed what detectives feared. The bullets matched those recovered from Justin Michael's bedroom. This was the murder weapon. Now the picture was becoming clearer. Someone had gone to extreme lengths to stage this crime, not just to make it look like a burglary gone wrong, but to make it look like Andy Wagner had committed the murder. Piece by piece, the evidence stacked against David Moffett. But detectives needed more than suspicion. They needed proof that he had not only carried out the killing, but deliberately tried to frame Andy. And in Moffett's home, they would soon find exactly that. By now, investigators were convinced David Moffett was behind the murder of Justin Michael. But motive was still elusive. Why would a man who barely dated Angie Verley go to such lengths? Stalking her, planning a murder, and even trying to frame her ex-boyfriend. The answer began to surface as detectives pieced together Moffett's recent behavior. Friends and co-workers described David as quiet, socially awkward, and often withdrawn. He worked in finance like Justin, but those who knew him said he lacked close connections. Relationships were rare for him, and when he met Angie through online dating, he seemed immediately attached. Though their interactions were brief, just a handful of text conversations and a couple of dates, David appeared to interpret the situation differently. He became fixated on Angie, holding on to the idea that their short-lived connection was meant to be something more. When Angie cut ties and quickly moved on with Justin, David grew resentful. What began as bitterness slowly spiraled into obsession. He created fake Facebook accounts to monitor Angie's activity, sent her messages from unknown numbers, and even drove by her workplace. Angie had no idea of the full extent of his behavior at the time. She simply thought their fling had fizzled. To David, however, it was personal. In his mind, Justin had stolen the life he believed he was supposed to have. Detectives uncovered evidence that Moffett had been planning something sinister for months. On his computer, search histories revealed chilling queries: how to break into a house, how to make a silencer, and even how to kill someone in their sleep. He had also researched both Andy Wagner and Justin Michael extensively, learning their addresses, daily routines, and even looking at satellite images of their neighborhoods. The frame job became clearer too. Investigators learned that Moffett had obtained Andy's personal information, including his driver's license number and signature, from online records. Using this data, he forged Andy's name on the firearm bill of sale and planted items at the crash site to make it appear Andy was the real killer. But, as meticulous as the plan seemed, Moffett had made a series of critical mistakes. His car accident near the crime scene was the biggest. Not only did it place him in the area at the exact time of the murder, but it also left behind evidence that unraveled his attempt at framing Andy. When detectives confronted Andy again with the new findings, he broke down, not out of guilt but out of relief. For days, suspicion had hovered over him, damaging his relationship and reputation. Now, it was clear he had been an unwilling pawn in someone else's twisted scheme. With the mounting evidence, police arrested David Moffett and charged him with first-degree murder. Angie, still reeling from Justin's death, was stunned. She barely remembered David and could not comprehend how someone she considered a passing acquaintance had killed the man she loved. But for prosecutors, the case against Moffett was about more than obsession. It was about control and rejection. When Angie chose Justin, David couldn't accept it. He didn't just want Justin gone, he wanted Andy destroyed too. In Moffett's mind, eliminating Justin and framing Andy cleared the way for him to step into the life he believed was stolen from him. The trial would reveal the depth of his obsession, but in the end, the evidence spoke louder than anything else. Ballistics, forged documents, planted evidence, and his own digital trail painted an unmistakable picture of guilt. For Justin's family and friends, it was a small step toward justice. But no matter the verdict, nothing could bring back the man whose life had been full of promise, cut short by a stranger's obsession. The arrest of David Moffat brought some relief to investigators, but for Justin Michael's loved ones, the nightmare was far from over. Now came the long and grueling process of bringing Moffat to justice. The trial began in 2015 in Polk County, Iowa, drawing widespread media attention. Prosecutors presented an overwhelming case built on 3 pillars: physical evidence, digital footprints, and intent. First, they laid out the forensic trail. The 9mm high-point carbine rifle traced to the private sale Moffat had orchestrated using Andy Wagner's forged signature. Ballistics experts testified that the bullets and casings from Justin's bedroom matched the rifle exactly. Then came the items from Moffat's car crash: the gloves, ammunition, and Kindle searches, tying him directly to the crime. Next, prosecutors walked the jury through Moffat's digital history. His computer revealed search after search, each one more disturbing than the last. How to break into a house, how to make a homemade silencer, and even how to kill someone in their sleep without waking them. His obsession with Angie and his surveillance of Justin painted the picture of a man consumed by rage and jealousy. Finally, the prosecution exposed the frame job. They demonstrated how Moffat had gathered Andy Wagner's personal information and forged his name to create a false trail. The oil change receipt and gun bill of sale weren't clumsy accidents. They were deliberate attempts to divert suspicion. The defense, meanwhile, struggled to mount a counter-argument. They suggested there wasn't enough proof that Moffat had actually pulled the trigger, hinting that perhaps Andy really was involved. But the jury wasn't swayed. The evidence against Moffat was too precise, too overwhelming, and his bizarre attempt to implicate Andy only made his guilt clearer. After weeks of testimony, the verdict came: guilty of first-degree murder. David Moffat was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Justin's family, the verdict brought a measure of closure, though not peace. His fiancée, Angie, was left devastated, her future stolen in a single night. She later described the trial as reliving the trauma over and over again, each piece of evidence a reminder of the life she and Justin would never have together. Marie Michael, Justin's mother, spoke of the unimaginable pain of losing her son, but also of her gratitude toward investigators who unraveled the twisted puzzle Moffat had created. She said what haunted her most was not just the brutality of the act, but the senselessness of it, that Justin's life had been destroyed not by an enemy, but by a man who was little more than a stranger. The community of Grimes, too, was left shaken. In a city where violent crime was rare, the murder served as a grim reminder that obsession and jealousy can turn deadly, even in the quietest of neighborhoods. In the years since, Justin Michael's story has been remembered not only as a shocking true crime case, but also as a warning about the dangers of unchecked obsession. For his family, the focus has been on preserving his memory as a son, brother, fiancé, and friend who lived a life full of kindness, adventure, and promise. David Moffat, now serving his life sentence, never publicly expressed remorse. His actions, from stalking Angie to framing Andy, revealed a man so consumed by rejection that he destroyed multiple lives in pursuit of a fantasy. For Justin's loved ones, justice may have been served, but the loss will always remain. As one family member put it, "We got the verdict, but nothing can give us Justin back." And with that, the story of Justin Michael's murder closed in the courtroom. A tale of obsession, betrayal, and a life cut short. A story that will forever haunt those who knew him, and one that reminds us all of the devastating consequences when infatuation turns into violence.